There are two types of incidents that you can add as the main event in the sub-event section of the train failure form. These are train fault and train axle or wheel loading fault detection. Before we look at the sub-event in SMIS, let's take a look at the sub-event definition to understand what should be entered on this sub-event, including who should enter it. To do this, we need to head to the RSSB service desk. We are now in the solutions area of the RSSB service desk, which you can see at the top of the page. Knowledge base, SMIS sub-events, and train failure form. So let's head to the train axle or wheel loading fault or detection area of the guidance, right here. Firstly, you can see the definition. The definition reads, any operation of a hot axle box, HABD, or wheel impact load detector, WILD, whether or not a train fault is confirmed. Next we have SMIS reporting scope, where we have event details of the reporting scope, which is an excerpt from Table B of the SMIS application matrix. So the description of the reporting scope includes any case of a hot axle box detector equipment activated by passage of train, or B, wheel impact load detector recording an impact greater than 439 kilonewtons for a rail vehicle. There's also a note here to say that you require a train fault to be added as a prior sub-event if the cause was due to a train defect. Next we have the input by column, and these events are generally entered by the railway undertaking, in particular freight companies. And then finally we have event scenarios with common event scenarios that would be entered under this event category, including details of which prior sub-events to add, if any, and what objects and roles to select for these types of events. So there are 3 examples here. Now that we understand what should be entered into SMIS on the train axle or wheel loading fault detection sub-event, let's now take a look at the sub-event section on the train failure form in SMIS. So now we have opened the train failure form, and let's head on over to the location section. Remember, we are just looking at the location section on the train failure form in the context of train axle or wheel loading fault detection sub-events. The location type field for most train axle or wheel loading fault detection events, the location will either be running line or else the location would be yard depot siding, and this is depending on which the event took place. So once you have chosen the location type for the event, you will then be asked to provide more granular location information on the form. But we have a separate video on locations that you can refer to if you want to find out more about these location sections. So let's look at the main sub-event section for the train failure form. So now we're going to go ahead and add the train failure event, which is the train axle or wheel loading fault detection. You can see immediately when the section has been added that this red bar guidance appears again, reminding you about which objects to add in relation to this sub-event. So for this sub-event, the object that you would always add is the train, and we'll cover objects in the people, trains and other objects section of the form. So the first train axle or wheel loading fault detection sub-event question includes which system was activated. These include hot axle box detection, so HABD on train, hot axle box detection HABD trackside, and wheel impact load detection, or WILD. Only when selecting the wheel impact load detection answer will you get follow-on questions. The following questions include which side of the axle triggered the activation, where you can say both left and right hand sides, left-hand side, right-hand side, or unknown. And then you also have to add the axle load in kilonewtons. So you put the number in here. So we'll say 400. And this is the most amount of detail that you would add to the train axle or wheel loading fault detection section. So staying within the sub-event section, let's move down to the prior sub-event part. And this is where you get to add just one prior sub-event if it led to the main event, so if it led to the train axle or wheel loading fault detection. You can currently add any of the simplified SMIS sub-events as prior events if one of these has led to the train axle or wheel loading fault detection event. However, the most likely prior sub-event you would be required to add would be the train fault, say where a train had a wheel impact load detection activation due to excessive wear of the wheels, where you'd want to select the prior event of train fault to record a wheel fault. So you would select yes for prior sub-event, add the prior sub-event to the train failure incident. Here you would click on this arrow and you would find train fault and click on that, and then this will add the train fault as the prior event. And here you would have to complete the train fault questions that appear within that sub-event. Now let's look at the people, trains and other objects section in relation to the train axle or wheel loading fault detection sub-event, where I'm going to point out some of the more common objects and object roles that you would be expected to record in relation to this event. As a reminder, there is only one people, trains and other objects section on each SMIS form, meaning that if a prior event is involved, say like the train fault example that I previously mentioned, it's in this section that you add all objects related to both the prior and the main sub-event. So all these get added to the people, trains and other objects section. So firstly, in relation to this type of event, you would always be expected to add a train object. So let's go ahead to the section repeater and add a train. Your next job is to review the roles. So again, you select all the ones that apply, but if in this case it was just a train axle or wheel loading fault detection that occurred, you would select activated a train axle or wheel loading fault detector. If the train was also faulty, you would select faulty here as well. You can also see this red bar guidance that appears, and this is the reminder to add an object, and it says remember to add a rail vehicle to the event as well if appropriate. I guess if appropriate means in this instance if you have the specific details of a rail vehicle object, then really it would be good to add the rail vehicle as well as the train. Back to the train object though, there are additional fields that you can answer, or you need to answer in relation to the train object. So we have a separate video on people, trains and objects, which is more comprehensive on how to complete these sections. However, I'll just go through these ones now. So we could say, did the train have a reporting number? Let's say yes, and we can put in that the reporting number in this instance was 6 Mike 0, 0. You can also enter the departure time if it's known, the origin and destination of the train, although these are not mandatory. Train type, we can enter it as freight and other. You are then asked the detailed freight and other train type, so let's say it was a freight single commodity. You're then asked what was the train movement at the time of the event. If you don't know, you can enter unknown. Alternatively, you could enter approximately constant speed, or if any of the others apply, select them. Then you enter the train operator. So here you get the organization list and you can say who the train operator were. And in which area of the train did the event occur is an optional question, but if it's relevant, you can select the area of the train. So let's say in this instance, we also had specific details of the rail vehicle involved. So let's go ahead and add the rail vehicle. Again, there's a role here to say activated a train axle or wheel loading fault detector, so we'll click on that. And then some of the rail vehicle questions are things like rail vehicle type. So we'll select wagon. You can enter the rail vehicle number and the rail vehicle operator. So again, that's the organizational list that you can select from. Finally, let's look at the possible causes in relation to train axle or wheel loading fault detections. So when no fault is found after, say, a hot axle box detection upon examination and the axle and wheel have a normal running temperature, then you can select cause not known. For events that have a prior event of, say, a train wheel fault, you may want to select that the train was faulty. So for this, you go to Infrastructure, Vehicles, Equipment and Clothing, Vehicles, Rail and Road. Then you can select Unreliable, Faulty or Not Working. And then you can select Rail Vehicle Fault and pick from one of the list of options there. So that's if the fault was due to a train fault, including a wheel fault. For faulty trackside equipment, again, you go to Infrastructure, Vehicles, Equipment and Clothing. You would select Railway Infrastructure, Unreliable, Faulty or Not Working, and you would select one of the failures here. So other railway infrastructure fault or something along those lines. Or we also have detector false alarm. So there are some of the options that you can select if the infrastructure is the cause of the incident.